Why do I have such a love affair with Vietnam? It is my view that Vietnam rises phoenix-like from the ashes of a truly brutal history. And I think the rise of Vietnam serves to illuminate the remarkable potential across the developing Asian nations. It is the youngest nation on planet Earth, with 65% of the population less than 25 years of age. It has the highest literacy ratio of any country in the emerging world. Intel, some months ago, declared that Vietnam was its most exciting investment destination of any country in the world. I hope you join me in wishing the 83 million citizens of Vietnam well, because I don't know of many other nations on earth that deserve the peace and prosperity that modern Vietnam has found. And in my mind, they're an inspiration to us all. I think it is of almost imperial arrogance for any of us to think that just because the United States of America spent too much, borrowed too much, saved too little, and attempted to defy the laws of economics, and then Wall Street took all this toxic waste of ninja mortgages, securitized them, bundled them up, and then they were sanitized by the rating agencies, and the Wall Street marketing machines spread this toxic waste like a virus around the world in 2008, nearly bringing the entire financial system, if not the economic system, to its knees. I think it's of imperial arrogance for us to suggest that just because that happened in the United States, that someone in Vietnam is denied the opportunity of being the first in their family to go to university, to be the first in their family to buy a car, to be the first in their family to buy a house and not live with their grandparents. I do not believe that the events in the United States in the lead-up, the housing bubble, and the debt debacle will derail the long-term optimism and energy and inspiration I see each and every time I go to Vietnam. They are a shining example to all of us, and they serve to illuminate the remarkable potential across the developing Asian nations. Please note that Australia is on the emerging side of the Great Divide. It's not just because they gave me a passport. And we'll talk more about Australia later. Okay, Frank Sinatra sang a great song, It's Up to You, New York, New York. Some of you in this room can even admit that you like that song. I love it. It's up to you, New York, New York. Frank Sinatra, sorry Frank, it's not. It's not up to New York, New York. It's up to Chongqing, Chongqing. Who's been to Chongqing? Be honest with me and tell me if this, please raise your arms if this is the first time you've ever heard of the city of Chongqing. Okay. What's the population of the municipal area of Chongqing? It's in central China, 32 million people. 32 million people, one of the fastest growing cities in the world over the last decade, if not the fastest. And we'll spend a bit of time in Chongqing in a minute. We've got to understand, and this is an essential part of the new reality that I've been telling now for many, many years, that there are over 3 billion consumers in developing Asian nations. That excludes Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, so on. Over 3 billion consumers in Asia. And China's new frontier, its new economic frontier, is not Walmart in Miami, Florida. It is not Manchester. It is not Birmingham. It is not Madrid. It is not London. It is not New York. It is not San Francisco. It is its own backyard. It is Chongqing and all the cities in the interior of China. Next year, China's high-speed rail network will be larger than the rest of the world combined. In 2009, they spent approximately 100 billion on high speed. 2010, about the same amount. This year it's going to be slightly less. About 18 months ago, Barack Obama said to the nation that we need to address our infrastructure challenges in the United States of America, and he earmarked $8 billion to be spent on high-speed rail. As far as I'm aware, not a dollar of that has yet been spent. And since he made that proclamation, the Chinese have spent $200 billion on high-speed rail. These are staggering statistics, but it's all part of the new reality. And on that subject, I'm going to share with you some data that came from the Economist Intelligence Unit. And the only reason I'm sharing this with you is because obviously it supports my view. I wouldn't share numbers with you that in any way contradicted anything I was saying. I have spent 27 years on Wall Street. China's new 5-year plan includes a boost to development of inland provinces. Massive road, rail, and airport development projects will bring virtually the whole of urban China into the modernized transport infrastructure. Now listen to these numbers. A further, that's in addition to what is already there, a further 35,000 kilometers of high-speed rail will bring every city of more than 500,000 into the high-speed rail network. A further 83,000 kilometers of expressways will connect every city of more than 200,000. And 45 more airports will raise the national total to 220. When I came to Australia in 1997, there was a debate at the time about another airport in Sydney. I've been here 14 years, there's still not a spade in the ground, not one single additional airport. China's building 45 new ones over the next 5 years in addition to the 220 they already have. And it goes on and on and on and says that these cities, Chongqing being one of them, will form a middle China belt of areas that will market themselves as cheaper manufacturing bases not too far from coastal ports. That's what's happening in China. And what will happen, and Premier Wen said it at the NPC in March, the National People's Congress. He unveiled the 12th 5-year plan, and he spoke there about the rebalancing of the Chinese economy. And what was he talking about? Less reliance on exports. Why? Because the officials in Beijing were gobsmacked at what they saw in the United States of America. They could not believe their eyes. When each financial institution fell like dominoes, one after the other. Bear Stearns, Lehman, AIG, Fannie, Freddie, then all the major banks were basically recapitalized. They knew they could no longer be held hostage to the United States of America. Therefore, they put all their efforts into developing what? An increase in domestic consumption in China and facilitating a mass migration of investment away from the coastal areas of China into its vast interior. And hence why I now say it's up to you, Chongqing. When I first started talking about mobile phone sales in India, there were about 2 million a month. I was very excited about it. There are now 20 million mobile phone sales a month in India. In 2002, there were 6 million mobile phone subscribers in India. There are now 600 million. I'd say that's growth. But there's one thing, and I'm going to have to wrap up soon. There's one thing that I want you to remember from tonight, because I may never see some of you ever again. Particularly when you hear my conclusion, you'll never invite me back. But there's only one thing I really want to have resonating in your ears from tonight. I'm not suggesting you wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat or anything. The most significant and defining economic phenomenon of our lifetimes is the rise of the Asian middle classes. That will shape and define the rest of our lives, our children, our grandchildren, and their children. It is the rise of the Asian middle classes. CLSA, which is a highly respected group out of Hong Kong, published a very in-depth report, and I just stole these numbers out of there. And I've read the report, and I have been on this bandwagon for a very long time. I think these numbers, quite frankly, if they're out by $1 trillion here, it doesn't really matter. The scale of them is just staggering. Today, there are approximately 570 million people across the developing Asian world. that have disposable household income in excess of $3,000, our Aussie being the same as the US now, thereabouts. I don't have to keep qualifying as a US dollar. 570 million people having disposable income above 3,000 US dollars. They believe that will grow to about 945 million in 5 years. I think that's a very conservative estimate, personally. That will extrapolate to discretionary spending growing today from 2.9 trillion to about 5 trillion. The most significant and defining economic phenomenon of our lifetime is the rise of the Asian middle classes. And by spending more, they will save the submerging world. Do not look to the United States, the United Kingdom, Spain, Ireland, and all the other submerging countries to be the locomotives of the global economy in the next 5 to 10 years. The best case scenario, the very best case scenario is they grow 1 to 2%. The worst case scenario, well, you know what that is. This is where the growth will come from. Talk about the motorization of the world's most populous nations. China, 7% of the population today have private motor vehicles. In India, it's 3%. Indonesia, it's 3%. A decade from now, where do you think those ratios will be? It's scary. It's scary, particularly if you drive on Indian roads. With only 3% of the population owning a private motor vehicle, it's chaos. I would never go back there if 25 to 30% of the population had a private motor vehicle. Unless, of course, Manmohan Singh and his infrastructure vision eventuates, and they are dedicating themselves to significant improvements in infrastructure. Moving forward, China will slow. From 1978 to the end of 2010, China has grown at an average annual rate of 10%. No other nation in the history of humanity has ever grown anything like that for such an extended period of time. China is now the second largest economy in the world. It is therefore a maturing giant. My long-term trend growth rate now for China moving forward is 7%. I published that number actually just before the MPC in March of 2011, where Premier Wen actually unveiled a 7% target over the next 5 years. It's my view as well that the Chinese economy will moderate in terms of growth terms. In absolute terms, China is still going to be generating a huge increase in GDP. If they grow at 7% a year, given they're now a $6 trillion economy, they're creating an economy the size of Taiwan each and every year. The composition of growth will change, no doubt. Less reliance on exports, a greater revaluation of the renminbi, and a greater reliance on what? Domestic consumption, as the Chinese middle class sees incomes rise, leading to an increase in spending. I'll briefly make some comments about Australia. I don't need to tell you that our economic destiny lies in Asia. I don't need to tell you that 80% of our exports are destined for Asia. I don't need to tell you that we now sell $6 billion worth of goods each month to China, and then in 1990 we sold about $50 million worth of goods to China. I don't need to tell you we sell more to India today than we do to the whole of the European Union. In fact, our exports to India are now twice our exports to the United States of America. This is great news.